After I made that investment, we literally went from 4 to 8 million, like in 1 year. There's a formula I followed in terms of delegation. Profit margin originally was like 42%, went down to like a 25%, and eventually for like 5 years was like between 7 and 9%.
So Jason, question I love starting these podcasts with is cash flow. Cash flow can be a tough topic for a lot of people. Have you dealt with cash flow issues and how have you managed them in the past?
Yeah, cash flows is super important just because sometimes you can grow yourself out of business if you're not careful, right? So, you just have to be careful about hiring too quickly, mismanaging budget, putting budgets in place, making sure that you adhere and stick to budgets. There's also, some months where there's like 3 pay periods instead of 2, right? And so that could be a detriment to companies. So I'd say early on, just make sure that you are kind of managing everything that I just said properly. But then I would also, urge everybody to maybe get a line of credit as well, so that when there are those periods where you do have that third pay period, that you can kind of tap into that temporarily. But yeah, it's important. Like I said, I've seen agencies kind of grow themselves out of business, and that's not fun.
Yeah, I feel like the line of credit advice is such an American advice to give. Awesome. And I watched a previous podcast with you, Jason, where you mentioned that you guys lost a 100K client pretty early on. So from that, what experience has that given for your approach to client concentration risk and financial planning?
Yeah, that was not a fun period because it came at the end of the year, like around holiday time, right? And so when you have like large clients like that, and that was a client that we had for many years. It wasn't like it was like a new client, but that client got acquired by a bigger law firm, and so they basically were going to be bringing SEO in-house, and so we didn't know that, and so we were kind of fully staffed up to kind of make sure that we cater to that client. And so when that news broke, obviously we had to scramble, and we had to actually make some hard layoffs during that time, right? And so that was not a fun position to be in, especially around the holidays. And so, what we learned then after that is client concentration is real. You never want any one client to start to exceed too much of your concentration. And so now what we do is we're very strategic about the clients that we take on, and making sure that it is a very balanced concentration, so that we're never at the mercy of losing one client and having to make those hard decisions again. Plus, it's also something that a potential buyer looks at too. So if you do ever look at maybe selling your business, and you have too much concentration, that's a turnoff to the buyer.
Awesome. And I've heard again on previous podcasts that you are all about hiring people smarter than you. What's your process for identifying and attracting top talent?
Yeah. Well, for the first thing, it's, I am not the person that is identifying and attracting the top talent, right? I have a very more competent and capable person and team that does that. And so, they're the ones that are basically writing the ads, writing the job descriptions, looking at what our needs are, and then pre-qualifying, candidates, and then interviewing, and then setting up second interviews and third interviews, and making sure that the individual has a true passion for whatever it is skill that we need. But most importantly is making sure that they're going to fit from a cultural perspective at our agency. Culture is a real big deal. We have core values that we live and die by. And so if we see that there's somebody that's, qualifying for a position that's like super smart and fits the role perfectly, but we don't think that they're going to be a cultural fit, that's a turnoff for us. So
I love that. And that's one thing we spend a lot of time with our clients, is literally what you said. We can find somebody with that SEO ability, but if they're not a cultural fit, they're going to be out of the business in 3 months, and that's not good for anyone. Do you guys use DISC assessments or personality tests or anything for that?
We do for sometimes more of the senior leadership, but we don't necessarily do that for every specific role. Now there's room for growth, and I imagine there's nothing wrong about that. In fact, that gives you a competitive advantage. But just we were not set up to do it for everybody yet.
Awesome. And so, Jason, you scaled from $0 to $20 million. At what revenue point did you realize that you needed to change your leadership approach, and what specific changes did you make?
Yeah, so I think it was about 3 years, maybe 3.5 years into my business, where we were growing, at let's just call it just a regular growth pace. We were about maybe like just under $4 million in top line revenue. The margins were really high at that time just because I was kind of doing everything. It was more of like a lifestyle business than it really was an asset agency. And at the end of the year in the United States, there's a guy by the name of Uncle Sam that comes knocking at people's door, and he has his hand out and he wants money. And so that's the government. And so I had to write a large check, that year. And that was after working like tirelessly, like day and night, and disrupting vacations to take sales calls. And I figured, this is just crazy. Like I worked so hard, and at the end of the year, I'm just paying back, almost half of the profit that I made to the government. I'd rather defer that profit and bring smart people into place to kind of help offset some of the things that I do. And so I got introduced to my COO by a mutual friend. I ended up bringing him in that year. He then recruited our CFO, who he'd worked with for about 10 or 12 years at a previous company. And so that was kind of the genesis of me bringing in some senior leadership. And then we started to hire people. We started to get more compliant. There's things that I were doing that weren't necessarily up to standards in terms of like, contractor, employee, that kind of stuff. But that year after I made that investment, we literally went from 4 to 8 million, like in 1 year. Right. So it's so important to me get out of my own way and put people that are more competent in place.
That's amazing. And honestly, we've had 3 agency owners that I've had on this podcast recently who have mentioned that they had to step back to not be the CEO, but more the founder and look at it that way. But nearly every one of them had problems delegating things. I'm sure you went through that as well. What advice have you got for delegation to that senior team?
Yeah, so there's a formula that I followed in terms of delegation that I think would be like a nugget for those that are listening. And so basically, the formula goes like this. For like 30 days, as you start to do things, like everything that you do. So if you wake up in the morning and you're spend 3 hours checking your email, and then you spend an hour putting out a fire, and then you spend 2 hours doing payroll, right? Just start to document everything that you do, right? Just kind of like in like a spreadsheet. And then next to that, you're going to have 4 different columns. And so you'll basically put whether you are, I think it's E as in excellent, U as in unique, I as in competent, and C as in competent, right? So there's 4 things, right? And so if I'm doing accounting, like that's something that I'm incompetent, so that's going to be an I, right? If I'm checking email, I put a C. I'm competent at that. If I put out a fire, a client fire, I could say I'm excellent at that. If I'm writing the chapter of my book, that's unique to me, right? So what you want to do is you want to just document things. And then the next thing you do is just put like hourly rate that you'd pay somebody to do those things, right? So like I might pay somebody $20 an hour to check my email. I might pay somebody $50 an hour to start putting out fires. I might pay somebody $70 an hour to do accounting, right? I might pay myself $2,000 an hour to write my book, right? And so I think you'll quickly realize after a 30-day exercise that you are probably a $25 an hour employee, right? And then from there, now you have a list of everything that you need to start delegating to other people, right? And so that was the formula that I used. And then I hired an executive assistant that took over like half of that list. And then it freed up more of my time to do things that are within my zone of genius, I guess.
Awesome. That's a really, really interesting framework. I think people will get a lot of value from that.
Yeah, thanks.
So, Jason, you've emphasized creating systems to prevent failures rather than blaming people. Can you
Mhm.
share a specific example of a system you built that transformed a recurring problem area in your agency?
Yeah, one comes to mind immediately. It was like a Saturday after, I'm sorry, it was a Saturday night. My phone is ringing. It's one of my clients that doesn't necessarily call me on a Saturday night. I answer the phone. I'm like, hey, how are you? And all of a sudden, blah, 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 blah. Like I'm just getting yelled at, right? And I'm like, oh my God, what am I getting myself into here? So I guess what happened was, we do work for law firms in the United States, right? And so there was a human error that was made on a very important page on their website where the writer left off like one digit on their phone number, right? And so it was like this for, I don't know, maybe like 30 days and nobody caught it. And so for 30 days, people were trying to call this law firm from this one particular page on their website and the phone wasn't ringing, right? And so they noticed that there was like a drop in leads and a drop in cases and it wasn't a good conversation to have, right? But I had to come up with a solution for that. And so rather than try to fire the person that made that mistake, I was grateful for the mistake because it allowed us to have to come up with a solution so that doesn't happen again for any of our other clients, right? That's really where you have you have to really have a different perspective, right? And so, that Monday morning, I met with our engineering team. I'm like, we could never let this happen again. What kind of solution can we put in place? And so they ended up writing a script that basically goes out and checks every one of our clients' websites, multiple times per day, just to make sure that all the phone numbers validate. And if it doesn't, it alerts it and it'll alert like somebody off after hours to kind of fix it. And so now that's just a system that we have in place, and we've never ever had that problem again, right? So I think that's a good example of a failure that brought something up to the surface that we solve for a lot of our other clients.
Awesome. And on the topic of failures, Jason, what's been the most expensive lesson you've had in your agency career thus far?
Um, I would say there's two things. Getting an executive assistant earlier, because I was probably spending my time doing things that I probably shouldn't have been spending my time on, and my time is valuable. And I probably could have been leveraging my time to do things to make the agency grow faster if I would have gotten an executive assistant sooner. And then the second thing would have been getting a coach sooner as well. I didn't get a business coach until we were about 5 million in revenue. And I got the coach so that he can help us grow from 5 to 10. Since we hired him, we've grew from 5 to 20. But I think we might have grown a lot faster if I would have gotten a coach to hold me accountable and to give me some cliff notes and shortcuts into doing things, so I didn't have to pay them for the mistakes that I was making. So
What's one of the best things that the business coach has taught you?
For one, that I was the constraint in my business, and then the second was, I need to set myself up as more of a thought leader. And he said that I needed to write a book. And so I don't think I was really going to write a book. And then he basically, held me accountable to doing that. And that was one of the best decisions that we made as an agency.
Awesome. Because that's how I know you is from your book.
Oh, is that right? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. See, we wouldn't be having this conversation if he didn't hold me accountable to that. Right?
Quick pause. If you're getting value from this conversation about scaling agencies and hiring top talent, I want to share something that might help you. Are you struggling to find A players for your digital marketing agency? we've got you covered. For SEO experts who turn rankings into revenue, head to SEOforhire.co. For paid media specialists who boost your bottom line, check out paidmediajobs.com. And if you're looking for foot rubs, you're definitely in the wrong podcast. All right, let's jump back into the episode.
Okay.
Awesome. So we've touched on hiring, and I don't think there's anybody out there who hasn't made hiring mistakes. What advice would you give to agency owners to avoid hiring mistakes?
So when you're first building an agency, sometimes you like to sound bigger than you really are, within the first year or two. And so you don't really have the proper budget to put, more senior people in place. And so I've even made these mistakes, but I see a lot of people make the same mistakes. Is you start giving people fancy titles early on, right? And these are people that have not earned those titles, and so that creates a lot of problems, right? So like if you're just getting started and you have two people working at the agency, and then you hire somebody right out of college and you just kind of make them the chief marketing officer of your agency, just because it sounds cool or on a business card, and they have no experience, and nor should they have that title, that's going to make things very complicated later on, right? Because you really shouldn't have a chief marketing officer. And while you might be paying them not a lot of money for that role because it's a new role that you created, you are blocking yourself in the future from really hiring the right chief marketing officer when you get to 10 million and you need to go to 20 million or 30 million, right? So I think that's a big mistake, is just be careful of just kind of giving out fancy titles early on when you're building your agency.
Interesting. And your agency, are you guys fully remote? Or are you in office?
Yeah, so we have a studio here in Hollywood that we do like videos and podcast, and it's more of like a rental studio that I use. But the agency was set up even well before COVID, to be a fully remote agency. I didn't want to hire people that were constrained to a 5-mile radius of an office building in some city in the United States. So it was all set up by design that way.
Awesome. And you mentioned how important culture is for you guys. How do you maintain culture and accountability in a 100% remote?
Yeah. So we have huddles, we have full team meetings. We have culture crews that work within the organization, and they come up with different things that we can do as an organization, even as a fully remote company. So we might do like a random act of kindness week. We call it Rack Week, where we give people time to kind of go do things within their local community and post photos. And, now everybody's kind of doing good deeds within their community. We might do Halloween costumes. I think right now we've got like a cookie baking contest where we're giving awards for the best cookies, and everybody in the organization kind of votes on things. We've got an award. It's called a 127 award that we give away to an employee every month, and that's kind of like our employee of the month. So there's a lot of different things, but it really comes from having a senior director of people success. That's her role, and then having a team and a committee below her. And at the end of every year, she, the senior director of people success, fights for budget so that we can improve the livelihoods of our staff, whether it's better benefits or whatever. So we truly take care of our employees first, and then our employees take care of our clients.
Awesome. I love that. There's a book called Scaling Up, Mastering the Rockefeller Habits.
I have it. Yeah, I haven't read it in years, but I have that book.
I've got it.
Yep.
I've got it right here.
There. Yeah, Vern writes that. Yeah, I remember that. Yeah.
There's two things from him. My agency is very, very small. We've got a very small team, but there's two things that we got from that that's helped us. So we're fully remote as well, and it's just having daily huddles first thing in the morning, where the first 10 minutes is like catching up with everyone, and then we go into what we actually have to do for the workday. And the second thing is having a channel in Slack called 3 Wins of the Day. and you just put in your 3 biggest wins of the day. And it's just nice for the team to rocket emoji, love heart emoji, but then you can also see like the progress if you look back on it as well.
Oh yeah.
Really, just small little things like that I really like.
Yeah, I love that. One of the things that we used to do that too. I think there was a software. I think it was called Commit to Three. Was the software that we use, right? So that's similar to that. It wasn't the wins, but it was like the 3 daily commits that you're going to do. And I think we kind of outgrew that. Once you get like 120 people, like it's hard to kind of keep up with that. You have to put different systems and processes in place. But one of the things that we do at our agency is we have a surprise and delight channel. And so that's a channel where, our team is encouraged to surprise and delight our employees. I'm sorry, our staff, our clients. Sorry about that. So what they'll do is they'll look for wins on like a Tuesday morning, and then they'll basically surprise and delight their clients. And that's the stuff that like really resonates with our clients because not all the wins need to show up on a Tuesday call that's scheduled. Like sometimes the unscheduled stuff lets them know that we're thinking about them, right? So I think that's kind of important as well.
Awesome. I love little things like that.
Yeah.
So Jason, I've seen in one of your recent podcasts that you talk about how your 3-year vision is crucial to your success. Could you maybe walk us through how you ensure your team stays aligned with that and executes on your vision?
Yeah. So the 3-year vision, for those that don't know, is just a living and breathing document that I had created. You can't really have a company that there's no vision, right? I mean, like for years we operated that way, and it was just like any road will get you to wherever it is you're going, right? But you really kind of need to spell it out and be very crystal clear, and it needs to be a vivid vision. And so, my coach said, 1 year is not enough, 10 years too long, so let's create a 3-year vision. And so that's what we did. And so the vision is one of those things that, when we set our like quarterly goals and OKRs, like we're setting those goals and OKRs to meet or exceed what was in the vision, right? So like a good example would be I had put down that, I wanted to be Fortune's best places to work, right? That was just something that I put on the vision, right? And so in order to qualify for Fortune's best places to work, you had to meet certain like standards of things, right? So for quarter one and quarter two, we set things up so that we kind of met those standards. And then by quarter three, we applied for it, and by quarter four, we ended up winning like Fortune Best Places to Work, right? So, and that's just like one example, but like the whole organization is set up that way, right? So it starts from the leadership. We put KPIs and OKRs in place, and then the whole team kind of like does tasks to kind of level up to make sure that we're trying to get to that vivid vision.
I absolutely love that. I've got a whiteboard in my bedroom that's got, I'm 26 now, and it's got goals until I hit 50. But
Mm.
the funny thing is when I first did it, they were goals that you couldn't, they just kept on changing. So I had to
Mhm.
like rub them out all the time and like zoom out even more and more and more because they just kept on changing. And I was
Oh,
like, right, let's make them so big that I'll hit the small goals on the way anyway. So,
yeah. Yeah,
so
I
yeah.
think I think that's great. Like a friend of mine told me that she put together a list of like 350 things that she wants to do before she dies. You know what I mean? And so when you're just staring at that like every day, you know what I mean? Like, that like you're manifesting reality, right? And so like I've never created that list, but I bet you if I would have created that list, I probably would have half of that stuff done already. Just because I just do things but I think that's a powerful thing. I think those that are listening, it doesn't have to be 350. Even if you put 50 things that you want to do, like heck, even if you do 20 of the 50, like just imagine how great your life will be.
Awesome. And we previously mentioned how much you guys have grown in revenue. How do you balance investing in growth versus maintaining profitability, especially when you're going through those big scaling phases?
Yeah, that's really a hard decision that agency owners have to make at some point, right? Because early on, in most cases, you have a very profitable business, right? Because you're doing a lot of things, and you're in control of the cash flow, you're in control of the profit, right? And so most people just start to make decent money and they start buying nice cars, right? But they're working really hard, right? And so in that those times you're really trading your hours to make dollars, right? But I think success, in my opinion, is really when you take those dollars and you trade those back to buy more hours, right? And then you start to buy back your time, right? And so the only way that you get to that level, like right now, like my agency grows without me. I took a trip for 35 days. I came back and the agency was bigger than we were, right? Before I left. It's really hard to kind of build that. For me, it took about 6 or 7 years of me kind of taking a lot of the profit and putting it right back into hiring the right people, putting leadership in place, putting mid managers in place. So much so that our profit margin originally was like 42%, went down to like a 25%, and eventually for like 5 years was like between 7 and 9%, right? Profit margin, right? And talk about cash flow, like it's really uncomfortable when you have a 7% margin like that. But we were setting ourselves up to in order to get to $20 million. And so this year our margin is close to like a 22-23%, right? So now it's much healthier because we made all of those hires that we don't have to make multiple times. Like you don't need two, CTOs, you don't need two CFOs, you don't need two COOs, right? Like those are a lot of the one-off, very expensive hires that don't, come to the bottom line. So anyway, that's just advice that I give you. It's just a decision that you have to make at some point.
Awesome. And Jason, in your agency journey, what's one thing that you know now that you wish you knew at the start?
Uh, um, I think you hit on it earlier. I think the theme of this podcast is delegation. I think, I wish I would have learned that a lot sooner. It's a term that everybody knows, but as far as having like an art form and having discipline to do that, like that's the only way that you grow. And like I said, the biggest lesson that my coach gave me was that I was the number one constraint in my business. I'd imagine that, 95% of the people that are listening to this podcast right now, you are the number one constraint in your business, right? And so you need to kind of recognize that. You have to accept it, and you have to figure out ways that you can start to delegate the things that, that you shouldn't be doing to those that are more capable at it, so that you can focus on things that give you energy, right? There's things that give you energy, and there's things that take energy away from you. Find out all the things that give you energy, do more of that. Find out all the things that take energy away from you and delegate that to other people.
Awesome. And Jason, my last question I've got for you, it's more of a personal question as well, because I'd love to know the answer from you. But personal branding, I feel like people look at it as just a buzzword. They know the importance of it, but they don't really want to do it. You've written a book. I see videos from you all over LinkedIn. I see you at events. I see you've got a big following on Instagram, everything.
Mm-hmm.
What advice would you give to people to not just do the content, but to stand out?
Yeah. It's one of those things that you have to just start taking action, right? It's just little steps, right? You're not going to build a personal brand. First of all, recognize the fact that it's important to have a personal brand, right? Because what you're really building is an asset that will be sellable at some point, right? But the one thing that people could never buy is the personal brand, right? Gary Vaynerchuk, right? He's very popular. If he sells his companies, he's still Gary Vaynerchuk, right? You know what I mean? Like you're not buying that. So, but again, it takes consistency. It takes discipline. It takes getting out of things that are uncomfortable for you, and building up your confidence. And it doesn't happen overnight. The brand that I've built, took 24, 25 years of me doing this, and I still do it. Like you said, like, in fact, after this call, I've got a video content recording call with my assistant. We're going to, basically shoot probably like another 12 videos that will get scheduled for next month or something like that. Right. So what gets scheduled gets done. right? And so just start adding some of those elements to your schedule and just start doing it little by little.
I know I said last question, but I've got a follow up on that. So I love the way you said that, because that's the way I say it to my friends and family as well that are doing business. Is they look at content as, oh, I need to get a studio, I need to sit down, I need to do this, but you literally just need to schedule 2 hours and you can have a month of content. So
Mhm.
where for you does that ideation come? Where does all of that come from?
Comes from just personal experiences. It comes from case studies. It comes from clients complaining. It comes from lessons, right? Just the stuff that kind of happens on a weekly basis, right? When something happens and you feel like, whoa, I really learned a lesson here from this. Just jot that down and make that a topic that you can talk about, on a call. Because one thing about it is, people like success stories. Don't get me wrong, but I think people really resonate when you make your mess your message, right? And you're vulnerable and you talk about your failures, right? That's when people really resonate with you more. And that's where people kind of learn as well, right? So, it's one thing to kind of boast your chest and say, hey, look at us. We made the Inc. 5,000 for 6 years in a row, right? That's all cool. People will like that, but you'll get a lot more likes when you talk about that time when you fired a client, right? Just kind of be vulnerable.
Hey everyone, I hope you enjoyed that video and got some kind of value from it. If you did, please make sure to leave a comment in the comment section and let me know any feedback that you have for future videos. And of course, hit that subscribe button, because we will be releasing videos every single week. So you're going to want to stick around. Thank you, and see you in the next one.